My name's Stuart Aitken. I'm the creative director at Axis Animation, which is a sort of, I guess, a medium-sized CG studio in Glasgow. We do all kind of sorts of things, but I guess we're most known for game cinematics and trailers. So I'm at FMX this year to talk about the work we did tail end of last year on Halo 5 Guardians for Microsoft and 343 Industries. We came onto this project off the back a couple of years earlier of doing a kind of huge, massive 60-minute long thing for Halo 4 called Spartan Ops, where we kind of delivered sort of 10 6-minute almost webisodes. It was almost like a mini soap opera or drama that went along with sort of weekly releases of online missions. So this time they came to us, and for that previous project, because 343 were kind of so busy making the main game, we actually got left a lot to our kind of own devices to kind of see that right through from almost kind of script stage to completion. So this, for Halo 5, Brian Goodridge, who's the cinematics director at 343, kind of got in touch with us and said, he wanted a much more kind of collaborative approach. And not that there was anything wrong with what we'd done before, but I think for him as a director personally, he just wanted to kind of have a more joined up approach between the in-game cinematics and the pre-rendered stuff that we were doing. And they had this kind of massive idea for the centerpiece that was going to do double duty as the launch trailer. And they definitely wanted to be kind of look heavily involved with that. So the proposal from early on was that for not all the scenes we're doing, but for that centerpiece stuff, that 343 would actually deal with the layout and animation of that, and that we would deal with the kind of lighting, rendering, kind of what it looked like and the final execution, which is actually quite unusual. I mean, we work quite closely with some clients, particularly for in-engine stuff, where we'll maybe have to kind of work in their pipeline. But so we had this initial problem of, how do we take what they're outputting and getting it into our pipeline? On top of that, we had their idea for this scene was this massive action set piece, which is essentially a sort of one shot, unbroken traveling shot that goes from jumping at a Pelican dropship all the way down an entire mountain through a huge battle. And those kind of concepts always kind of cause some consternation at the best of times. I think that with the added need to kind of work really tightly with 343, we had quite a lot of problems to solve. We didn't have relatively speaking, a huge amount of time. The schedule was quite compressed as well. So it came, the initial stuff was very much kind of working out how we were going to do it technically. And actually we were kind of lucky. I think because we'd worked together before, we kind of knew one thing 343 are really good at is packaging things for people who are working with them. And I don't think that's as easy. Everybody, you just send us the stuff, and people heavily underestimate the amount of effort that sometimes actually requires on the client side to kind of get you that stuff in a format that's kind of really usable. But 343 were really good at that, and their internal pipeline for their game assets is actually quite aligned with ours anyway. They'll produce quite high-res assets and do that properly. So they've always got kind of quite a high-end cinematic asset version of their in-game stuff anyway. So actually, we kind of eventually discovered that rather than going through the usual process of taking somebody's stuff and up-resing it and retopologizing it and re-UVing it and doing all the things you'd normally do to get it into a kind of higher resolution pre-rendered pipeline, we pretty much looked at the geometry and went, actually, we can use that directly. There's maybe going to be places where we need to deal with a bit of subdivision or something, but it's going to be fine. And I think the other thing we lucked out on was, I think, over the last couple of years, I think physically based shading has become the new kind of linear in terms of that's what everybody's kind of seems to be aligning on a kind of very similar approach to how they're setting up rendering and shaders, whether that's real-time or pre-rendered. So the other thing we discovered was that the kind of texture map inputs that were going into their shaders actually were very close to the same kind of parameterization that we use in ours. So that was another place where we could go, okay, we can just use their textures directly as well. And the result of all that meant essentially that it became quite easy, because we both use Maya in an animation context, that they could pretty much just deliver us a massive big scene. And with a little bit of effort on scripting on our side, we could actually cache the entire thing into Houdini. So, and from then on, it was solving the more kind of usual production challenges in a massive shot like that. We had so many assets to deal with, so many effects to do. We had to kind of deal with the terrain itself, the environment itself, because we were covering such a huge amount of it in one shot. And the talk today is very much about kind of how we kind of met those individual challenges and having a kind of a brief look at some of those elements. And there's literally so many of them. You could probably go on for sort of 2 or 3 hours looking at everything. And the idea is to kind of give people a kind of an overview of how you break down a massive job like that into bite-sized chunks and how you deal with them, then how you reintegrate all of that to end up with a finished product. Yeah, and actually, I mean, I'm actually going to go into that a little bit, just a sort of generality. It's kind of funny working in game cinematics a lot. I mean, most of my career, that's mostly what I've done. And to a certain extent, it always feels like a little bit like the stepchild of the CG industry. It doesn't quite have the cachet of the of feature effects or feature animation. It kind of exists in some sort of slightly strange hinterland between those two more kind of established disciplines. And one of the things I'm really interested in is a lot of people see the work we do, and the budgets for that work come from the fact that it's marketing another product, a game, or is involved in supporting the narrative aspect of that game. And it's really kind of interesting for me about whether in the future the kind of work we do, because I think the work's great. You get a lot of creative input if you like doing kind of more mature audience, genre type material. There's not a lot of opportunities to do that commercially in animation. People have tried, I think famously, Final Fantasy, Spirits Within, which I don't think worked commercially. And ever since that, I think everybody's kind of shied away from doing it. But every time we release one of these things, they do kind of work as a standalone thing. And I think there's always a kind of huge clamour of people, the fans online going, oh, you should make a movie of this. And I think, people like us and Blur and Digic are kind of sitting there going, yes, we'd like to do that. So it's kind of, there's the hope that in the future that we can kind of take what we do on that stuff and maybe kind of, can that be a product in its own? I think it's a really interesting question. But yeah, I think there's this whole host of kind of issues around cinematics for games in terms of there's a lot of people who don't like them, that somehow they prefer, and I completely understand this point of view, they prefer the storytelling to happen more organically in the actual gameplay. But I think the reality is at the moment that's still quite limited. There's only so much you can do in terms of more kind of subtle, less explicit storytelling in games. Some games are really good at that, and I think it's a perfectly valid option. But I think if you want to get into dialogue and drama between people and all that stuff, it's still much easier to do that in cinematics than it is during the game, I think. So it's kind of funny, we've been doing this for about 20 years, and we've always expected it to sort of die out at some point, but it never does. And I think, with the recent increases in the new consoles and the wonderful stuff they're doing in real time these days, I think we keep, all right, okay, the pre-rendered cinematics days are numbered, but there's always reasons why it makes sense to do it. I think, so in Spartan Ops, I was involved right from the point of writing the script. So Brian Reed, who was the lead story writer in that 343, and him and myself would actually be kicking scripts back and forth between each other. And although 343 very much kind of set the overall arc for that story, we had actually quite a lot of leeway between ourselves to kind of work out how it wound in between them. And from that point we went, all the execution from that point on was all in Axis. This time this is quite different. So we did I think we had 8 scenes altogether. So we had like 3 scenes at the start and then like 4 or 5 scenes at the end of Halo 5. And for that centerpiece stuff, it was very much 343 going, this is what we want to do, can you help us execute that? For the other scenes, it was more traditional. So they pretty much did the scripts internally. And I think by the time they came to speak to us, most of that stuff had already been kind of sorted in the story side. So we didn't necessarily have a huge amount of input in the actual script and the story. But all those other scenes, even if 343 had maybe had a very quick pass at doing some kind of previs or storyboards themselves, Brian was totally happy for us to kind of revisit all of that, which was kind of great for myself. So yeah, for those other scenes, it was very much going through the usual process of kind of storyboarding them, going through a couple of iterations on that. And then we didn't do a lot of previs. A lot of those scenes were more dialogue based. I don't always find a great need to previs that stuff. The storyboards are, I think, a good enough way of getting your head into how the scene kind of breaks down. And again, with storyboards, I think of storyboards more as a kind of way of thinking through the scene, and not necessarily, oh, this is what the final result's got to be. So we kind of went into. So we kind of joined up with Brian again when we were kind of doing the actual kind of the kind of capture session in LA. So Brian was there because I think that's where he felt he wanted to kind of touch the rest of those scenes the most, was on the kind of performances. So we were both there when we did all the kind of mocap for all of those scenes. And from that point, we kind of, our normal pipeline is to get what we call kind of dirty data back from the mocap guys, so it's a profile in LA. So basically it's the sort of live solve data that happens on set before it's been cleaned up. And we kind of pump that straight into kind of layout. So you've got pretty much a pretty good approximation of what the performances are going to be in the scene. And it's much quicker to kind of work like that than trying to kind of, animate things kind of roughly, I think, for those kind of scenes. So yeah, we went through kind of layout process, and then we get the kind of cleaned up animation back from the mocap guys as well. Then we kind of animate on top of that, introduce facial animation, blah, 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 all the rest of it. So yeah, there's still a lot. I mean, I think in general, one of the great things about doing both cinematics and trailers for games is generally you get quite a lot of creative input. I think much more than you probably do in visual effects, I think. Visual effects, I think you tend to be, there's key shots, which are the effect shots, where you definitely got to do a lot of kind of concept work and sort of pre-visualization of various sorts in terms of what that effect's going to look like. But you generally, in my experience, don't necessarily have a huge amount of input in terms of, kind of where the story's going and what the idea is. And for trailers and cinematics, we quite often do that whole thing ourselves. I mean, we're almost a kind of part agency. We'll actually pitch the idea to the client. The client will go, this is our criteria, and they'll go to a kind of bunch of different people and go, come back with, hit us with your kind of thoughts on how to do this. And that's always really, really interesting and exciting. I think timescale, it's kind of the usual, that's a slightly boring answer, I guess. It's kind of budget, timescale, amount of stuff we had to do. I think the amount of stuff, I know that sounds like a slightly glib answer, but for Spartanauts, we had like 15 months production, and it was 60 minutes worth of stuff. We had more assets in that one scene down the mountain than we had in the whole of Spartanauts. And we had I think the actual CG execution part of it ran for 4 or 5 months. So it was just the scale of that stuff. It's like, how are we going to get all that data into the pipeline? How are we going to get it all rendered? And because you had this unbroken shot, which had huge amounts of volumetric, there was snow interaction, explosions going off everywhere. So it's always kind of volumetric things. So the options were either we're going to have the most mental compositing script anybody's ever seen, and we're going to have huge issues unless we use kind of decompositing solutions in terms of how we integrate all that stuff with the volumetrics. So I think it's certainly in the past, that's probably how we would have tried to approach it. We've done kind of similar things in the past, and I think we're slightly wary of that. And the other thing we knew is we had to be able to iterate quite quickly to get rendered stuff back to 343, because there's that whole thing of having to see what your animation looks like in a slightly more, the lighting being a bit more kind of solid feeling, so they get more of a feel of what the animation's actually doing. So there's a lot of chat about that, about okay, how do we render stuff so you guys can see, get feedback on what you're doing, so you can then update, your animation for what we're doing. So we kind of adopted this pipeline of everything everybody was doing got integrated back into one scene, and everything got rendered in scene, like the whole shebang. And that is what went through the farm constantly. So pretty much that one scene was rendering and re-rendering and re-rendering and re-rendering and re-rendering for about 4 or 5 months. I think I was looking through some of the material we had for the talk, and I think the last version of it was version 168. So we kind of adopted this whole approach of okay, people would do things separately, then they would get integrated back into this master scene, and then we just fix stuff. We were prepared for things to be kind of broken or not quite working all over the place, but because we knew we'd have enough iterations on it, we had to have time to kind of fix all of that stuff. So it was it was kind of throw everything at the kitchen sink and just fix what's broken each time it kind of goes through, and that kind of worked reasonably well in the end, actually. So, but it took a lot of pre-planning, and I think it was a very kind of deliberate approach. It wasn't something we kind of accidentally ended up like that. It was something where we kind of very much went, okay, these are all the dominoes we need to line up to kind of make that happen. The actual big downhill action piece, there's a lot of keyframing in it because there's no way you could motion capture it. You've got guys who can literally sort of jump 30 meters in the air and fly off cliffs and do incredible acrobatics as they're kind of fighting all these guys going down the mountains. The guys at 343 definitely motion captured little bits and pieces that went into that performance, but I think you could probably argue that was mostly hand animated. Where that differs, I think, where you've got a scene which is more or less kind of dialogue, more of a kind of your standard kind of dramatic scene between characters that isn't so much about action. My preference is always that if you're dealing with realistic human characters, your performance capture is usually the kind of best way to get if you're after kind of realistic feeling result is the best way to do that. So for all the other scenes we had, we used mocap pretty much, fully, and I'd say most of the time, I guess it's about 85% the way there. Occasionally we'll need to kind of animate over the top of that. Mostly, I guess, for retargeting issues, the fact, the actors don't look exactly like the characters you've got, particularly with the Spartans, which are kind of like 8 feet tall. And then we had, we used, so 343 had an existing setup with Profile in terms of how we were capturing faces at the same time. So, a lot of those actors we were using, some of their likenesses. So for people who had speaking parts who weren't wearing helmets or whatever, we had a sort of stereo camera set up on a boom hanging off the mocap sort of helmet thing. And then Profile would take that, they do kind of a whole bunch of kind of facial ROMs and sort of range of movement things as well to calibrate that system. And then what we'd get back from Profile was essentially an animated face rig, which we could then animate on the top of that. So usually in that face stuff, there's actually quite a little bit of cleaning stuff up and just sort of tweaking it. Simulation, on the other hand, is huge. I mean, almost all the effects were going through simulation pipelines in Houdini. So there's a whole bunch of things I'll be showing later on in terms of little bits and pieces in terms of how we were simulating snow interaction, explosions, thruster effects, even things like weapon fire were all kind of, some of that, the actual kind of muzzle flashes coming out the guns, a lot of that were actually kind of simulated in Pyro as well. So I think because we're very kind of Houdini-centric, we do all our lighting in Houdini as well as traditional kind of particle and simulation work. We had a great visual effects team on that in terms of the guys doing all that stuff. They had a huge amount of stuff to get through, so we were literally kind of pumping out. We had 4 or 5 guys pumping out, a couple of sims a day, almost, and then sort of iterating that. So we got kind of, like buildings destroying and falling down over the characters, things blowing up the side of them, all of that simulated. So I've been coming to FMX, I think, since 2008 was the first one I went to. Prior to that, I used to go to an event called Digital Media World in London, which is now sadly departed, which was, I guess, one of my, that was probably from sort of pre-2000 actually, which was, as a young guy trying to get into CG, that was my kind of main exposure to that world, and then went to SIGGRAPH a few times in America. And I remember going to FMX and feeling like, because SIGGRAPH had got kind of really huge and massive and felt like there's no way you could kind of see all of it. And FMX actually felt like this is a more comfortable kind of size of event, and they've still got great people coming to speak. The talks were great. And I think that's got better, and I think it's great, having that kind of European-centric, and the sort of flavour to the event's great. I think there's always a kind of good vibe here. It always feels like it's an exciting event. I think they've been really successful in getting some fantastic, speakers to come along. It's a pleasure, being asked to present. So personally, I've always, it's that chance to kind of reconnect with all the other stuff that's going on in the industry in a kind of concentrated way. I think, through the internet, we're all kind of, vaguely aware of lots of other things that are going on, but it's great to see that more, to have a kind of week off from what you're kind of normally doing, to go and kind of immerse yourself in that. Professionally, we're here recruiting as well, which is a huge thing. We've kind of grown arms and legs over the last few years, so a couple of my colleagues are in the recruitment stand, I think, even as we speak, looking for more people for us to hire. So it's a great opportunity for that, obviously, to meet young people kind of coming up in the industry who hopefully might want to work at Axis.